Hello everybody. Think we can get started. So this is again one of the last sessions for SNIA SDC. So this session, again earlier in the day I was kind of representing DMTF and now I am representing TCG, right? Two separate industry standard organizations kind of representing and providing updates into the SNIA. So again, for record and for new people, Chandra Nelogal. I'm with Dell ISG and I represent multiple organizations for Dell. And then I'm co-chair of the Storage Work Group, which does TCG. And kind of, some of the topics kind of overlap. The topic that Eric talked about, KPIO, really came out of this work group. And some of the things that Sailu talked about on the retention, some commonalities do exist. There is a common thread here, just for awareness. So what I'm going to talk about, just a little bit of intro, some of the learning objectives, status update of several documents. Really, I'll be spending a bunch of time on different documents that we have published and we are in the middle of working on from the work group. And some of the upcoming plans, although not a whole lot of details there. And I said other session, but the other session was really the reference to the session on KPIO. So as part of intro, TCG, very well known. I don't need to really provide an intro for it. But as an organization, TCG has work groups and focus areas spanning the IT industry, right? All the way from vehicle services to virtualization to server, PC client, TPM, data storage. There is a work group focusing on many areas. And several of the work groups produce specifications, reference documents, and app notes, test documents. And several of the work groups produce guideline documents, right? Like supply chain. There's a work group focusing on supply chain. Right now, they're only focusing on guideline documents, not real specifications. And coming to our work group, the storage work group, really we produce a bunch of specifications. We produce app notes or reference documents, test documents, like a whole plethora of documents are produced out of the storage work group. And if you go to the landing page on TCG and look at the work groups and click on the storage work group, you will see our documents are categorized in like 7, 8 different categories, and each one has multiple documents to share. Maybe I should have had that picture. So learning objective, not much time to be spent here. Just I want to provide an overview of all the work we have done recently and then some of the work happening, and then it helps in planning or aligning your roadmaps as the case may be. And as with any other work group, just like SNIA, we look forward for your participation, input, collaboration, and contributions. One update. So actively, we are not working on the core specification or the or some of these SSCs, the enterprise SSC, Ruby SSC, and the Pirate SSC. Those documents are not being actively worked. There is no requirement or errata or any other changes that we are tracking at this time. Having said that, let me jump to this slide. So this year so far has been fairly productive. I mean, I don't know how many work groups within any organizations are able to produce or release many documents. Again, of course, this is not all work done in 2023. It was a lot of work from the previous years that we are able to conclude and release the documents. So starting from February up until like really September, our KPIO document got published. So all of these are published, right? So we have the configurable locking for namespaces and LUNs. That was an update to the document. It really, I have one slide later on, but I'll give you a brief overview. So really it is a mechanism to manage your namespaces with a global locking object and you can create non-global locking objects, and you can assign them to namespaces or LUNs, and then you can extend ranges, set the ranges. All of that is feasible and is described in this specification. So that version we released in February, a newer version of it. Then the SIIS, and Eric referred to the SIIS document 1.11, where we really talked about, not a whole lot of KPIO was referred in that document, and I have that thing later on, where we talk about KPIO in a potential SIIS 1.12. But 1.11, really, I have a slide, but we talked about NVDMN, we added support for SD card interface, we added support for some of the zoned commands, and some of the reset mechanisms have been articulated. So that was the main changes in SIIS 1.11, and it was released earlier. Opal test case document to align to the Opal 2.02 was released again in May. And the CPIN enhancement, this is really the configurability of the CPIN credentials, right? So you have SID and other credentials in the CPIN table, and this document allows you to configure the CPIN properties in a manner, right? I mean, I have a slide for that, but I'll just describe. It's really the try limits, persistence of the try limits, and then the length of the credential value, and then whether during taking ownership of a device, taking ownership of an SP, do you force a change of the CPIN SID or not? Those things are configurable, and that is what is covered in the CPIN enhancement document. And then finally the KPIO. So the KPIO, you guys, several of you sat through the whole presentation that Eric did, where it is all about the key are inserted into the device, and then data is encrypted, and then you refer to the keys when you read the data back out, and the management of the keys is the responsibility of the host or other entities, and then the drive doesn't kind of quote unquote own the key like what you have in Opal or Enterprise or anything. So I won't be going more details into that, but we can have the discussion if needed. So work in progress. So the Opal additional feature set document is in public review right now, and it will conclude in October. And essentially the main change between the previous version and this version is the number of additional tables has increased. So we used to have 128, and now it is up to 2K, and because of that we have to make some changes in the tables, and that document got out of the work group, past the TC and board of directors, and it is in public review right now. And once it completes, depending on the feedback, we will be planning to release it soon. And again, this is for multi-tenancy, that type of use case. It's all the data store where you store the metadata around key material or anything else for that matter, and that's the management of that. Data store is what this document specifies. The application note or the reference document for the KPIO. So while working on the KPIO SSC specification, we also started to work on KPIO application note, and it is in the final steps. I mean, Eric kind of referred to it. In fact, we voted out of the work group this week. This Tuesday, we voted it out of the work group, and it will take its time to go through the TC and then the board of directors, and then make final changes and get released. Hopefully, I'm hopeful that the first two documents we will be able to release by, within a month or two, we should be able to get it out. The test cases and the FAQ document for KPIO, again, Eric reference to it, and Eric is the lead author for both of them. Those documents are in development, in progress, and we'll see a good time to publish them out. Errata for Opal 2.02 is in the works. We are in the final legs of document development and review. And once we are done, we will try to get that released. Hopefully, within a few months, we'll see. The SIIS 1.12, really, I don't have a specific slide for it, but really I can enumerate some of the main changes that have gone in. One is KPIO, mentioned in the slide. So KPIO related content, now it is in one of the annex of the document, and it is ready to, it captures all of them. And then there are a bunch of fixes, really. I think in one of the sessions we had talked about Depop. I think in one of the Azure talk, people talked about Depop and head level failure and things like that. So there was some material around that got cleaned up around it. There are a few other fixes that have gone into the 1.12. So again, other than KPIO SSC, not a whole lot of features enhancement, but a lot of the cleanup text has gone in, and we are maybe final changes, maybe in a few months we will try to get this released based on the level of fixes and other interest from the outside group as well. This I touched upon already. So SIIS 1.11, what are the main changes between 1.10 and 1.11? SD card, NVDIM interfaces, support for that, meaning a mechanism to encapsulate the TCG payload inside of the native NVDIM and SD card commands, and then get the response back. That's really what it boils down to. And then mapping of the reset mechanisms. What reset mechanisms that are native to a interface, how do they map to the TCG reset mechanisms? That's what it really talks about. And the same thing for the last bullet point there, mapping of some of the NVMe MI resets was really clarified in the SIIS 1.11 document. And the middle couple of bullets, so really we added some clarification for the user data removal methods and the zoned command support, really around when you perform a data removal operation like a gen key or a revert or anything, the behavior of the write pointer is what was really clarified and added to the sections. Each sections about SCSI, ATA and NVMe command set. How does that write pointer behavior, whether it resets back to the beginning of the zone, stays there, that's all discoverable and configurable, and that's what this document really clarified. So CP enhancement, I think I talked about this already. So really those are the things, right? We have the try limit setting and the persistence, whether it persists across a power cycle or not, that is configurable now. The length of the CPIN credential values is also configurable. I think min and max, we are making it clear. And then forced pin change. So forced pin change is one of those things wherein many of the FIPS policy submissions require a forced pin change, depending on vendor, depending on the drive type, depending on what you are submitting. Some people require it, some people don't. But then this document makes it a configurable item and an optional support. Obviously, all of these are optional support, but it makes that configurable. And then there is a current status flag in the discovery. Yes.
So in the case of the try limit, was that introduced to deal with the FIPS 140-3 changes, or was that something that was in motion before that?
I don't think it was anything specific to 140-3. I think this was, I don't know if it was really considering 140-3. Was there any specific limit value in the 140-3?
Yeah, that was one of the things that got tweaked, and so that kind of got a spotlight on it. So I was curious, but
no, I don't know. I don't remember exactly if it was with the consideration of 140-3. But it was definitely, it is now a configurable feature, and then you can have defaults, and then you can configure what that setting is in the factory environment. Additional data store tables, again, I kind of briefly touched upon it. The number of table entries are more now. And in order to do that, because we had run into some other limits in other tables, we had to change the document more than what was minimum needed. But it is now a released document. So data store management is now, you can support up to 2K table entries or tables in the data store, and that's what this enhancement was. So configurable locking. So this is a topic on its own, and we can spend a whole session just covering this fairly complex topic. Really, what it is trying to show here is you have, by default, all of the LBA ranges are in the global locking object, right? Then you are transferring some of them into non-global locking objects. You can transfer your global locking object or global LBA range into non-global locking objects, and then map them to namespaces or LUNs. And as and when you are doing it, the media encryption keys get generated or destroyed depending on what operation you're doing. Not only that, when a locking object is mapped to a LUN or a namespace, you can also adjust the ranges through the set methods, and that is also mapped, right? That is also again possible, and then depending on where you are mapping to, or if you are extending the range and consuming the range of a non-global locking object from global locking object, those operations will be permitted. And then if you are trying to extend into a range that is assigned non-global locking object, obviously the operation will fail. So all of that is documented, and from the previous version we had to do a little bit of cleanup work. A lot more explanatory text was added, and the stepwise details were added, and that's really the summary of the changes in this document. So again, I think that's really the presentation. So the SNIA key management, we are kind of monitoring it, not really direct impact. I know Eric is author of that document as well. And OCP security requirement, again, we are in a monitoring mode. There is no direct impact, I would say, at this time to TCG, but we are aware that that work is happening, and they may be tightening or clarifying requirements, but it doesn't have any impact to the TCG Storage Work Group as yet, but we are in a monitoring mode. And earlier in the day, I was talking about the SPDM storage binding. Although the protocol identifiers were assigned by the T10 organization, and and the SPDM DMTF work group is working just using that and transferring the SPDM payload through the native SCSI NVMe ATA commands. It doesn't have any direct impact for us, for the TCG work group per se. However, we are still looking through that, right? Tomorrow somebody might say, and there is some talk about that in OCP, if you're monitoring, hey, what about arrays? I need to know the status through the SPDM means, right? So if there is any other, like in our case, in the TCG case, we have gen key, we have revert SP, many methods are even assigned, right? Many methods wherein the underlying data might change, and is there any impact to that through this SPDM binding work or any other requirements coming from other work groups? We are in the monitoring mode. We will react as needed for those things. And then, last point, kind of again, kind of a theme here, right? So the SPDM 1.4, we said the same thing. Hey, for SPDM 1.4, it could very well be the anchor feature to support some of the quantum safe algorithms and methodologies, and that's something we are looking at. And many of the TCG Storage Work Group SSCs, at least the data at rest is all symmetric key encryption, right? Symmetric mechanisms. And the impact of the keys, impact of the algorithms, those things definitely we need to look at it, we are looking at it, and those might trigger changes to the documentation. We don't know, but there is no timeline for it, but definitely something that we are keeping an eye on. Really, I don't have anything else, but again, I mean, this kind of reuse of the slide from KPIO. I just wanted to put it up there. Yes.
So, in preparing the SNIA encryption and key management white paper, shameless plug, hopefully soon available, if not already. Part of the paper looked at TCG materials, and it also looked at certification, in particular common criteria and FIPS 140. So big wind up. So with, for example, Opal, there is a TCG, I guess, certification program. But the thing that I'm interested in is there's a new version of common criteria that came out in 2022. And there's existing collaborative protection profiles that were developed. It wasn't clear whether they were developed with TCG or inflicted on TCG, but given that there's a new version of common criteria, are you aware of any conversations in terms of possibly updating those collaborative protection profiles?
No, I'm not aware of. Within the TCG, there is a different work group called SIIS, Security Evaluation Work Group, if I'm correct in the acronym. They are really looking at all the certification programs. The other certification thing that we talk about in the work group is different, which is all test readiness thing, but there is a separate work group that is looking at it. At least I am not aware of any input or any requirement being driven due to the common criteria update. But again, what I'm definitely anticipating is, as part of the quantum safe readiness that we looked at, we may have to relook, and also the FIPS 140-3, right? There were some language consideration around, hey, what do you even consider an authenticated read or authenticated write? There were some language, and I think it all depends on the way you submit, but there were considerations like that. We have looked at it, but no, I'm not aware of anything driven directly due to the update to the CC.
So the reason I brought that up is that, you know, we had SNIA had a storage security summit about 18 months ago, and I'm not quite sure how we pulled this off, but we actually had two of the conveners from the ISO Security and Privacy Standards Committee. The Workgroup 3 convener, who's based in Europe, was basically giving the storage industry a heads up that the Europeans are going to be require certification of products coming into that jurisdiction, and common criteria is the tool that they intend to use. Mm-hmm. So if you know that that's in the pipeline, and we have a handful of these collaborative protection profiles, and if you're not familiar with common criteria, that's a way of getting a consistent set of security requirements into that if you wanted every drive manufacturer to have a minimum set of requirements, you say you must include this as part of your evaluation criteria, right? So if you know that the current documents may be suspect, and the EU is lining up to start, you need to be certified.
Yeah, got it.
It seems like from an industry perspective, and I asked Paul Suller on the IEEE side whether we're looking at this, but it seems like we should at least be scrutinizing these and see.
Definitely, a very valid point. And then the certification is a little bit of a complicated story on the TCG storage side, right? So the TCG storage and TCG whole certification program is all based on common criteria certification. So if you want to be TCG certified and be on the TCG certification program, you would have completed common criteria certification and you would have obtained it, and then that's when the trusted computing group will say, okay, your product is certified. However, many of the products, meaning the drives that implement Opal or Enterprise or whatever SSE that you have, they might go through the CC submission and certification process, or they may go through the FIPS certification process. And the FIPS certification process has its own process, right? Its own, you submit the policy and then you get qualified against your own submission of the policies, and then you get certified, and then it is listed on the NIST website. So that is not in the purview of the TCG. So the FIPS whole FIPS thing, vendors may go through a lot of circus to get it through, but then the TCG as an organization doesn't really have any recognition of the FIPS status as a TCG certified status, right? So it is fully developed on common criteria, and if common criteria is changing and if there is any impact, we'll take it as an input. We will put it on our radar and focus. Yeah.
Eric has talked on occasion, once or twice, that FIPS 140-3 level 2, level 3 stuff is rather rare at this point. Is there a similar situation in the common criteria certifications?
Rare in the sense?
Non-existent.
Nobody's passed it yet. Okay.
So common criteria is handled differently than FIPS 140. So there are national schemes, except in the case of the EU, they're trying to collapse the 27 into a single one, and they've been operating for years with that program. The change in common criteria, which is the ISO 15408 series, and there's companion documents, took almost a year and a half to go from draft international standard to final draft international standard, and then publication because of a copyright fight between ISO and some non-ISO entities. In other words, making the documents freely available was the basis of the fight. So they're out there. The laboratories that are accredited to do common criteria certification were part of that process. They're doing evaluations on a wide range of products. There are not a massive number of. If you go, you can actually, like in case of FIPS, you can go see evaluated products. There aren't a massive number of storage products that have gone through that program. And that's a bit of the heads up, is if you're going to sell in Europe and they start inflicting this, the lead time used to be you could hide behind a new version of common criteria is coming. Well, it arrived a year ago. So you can't hide behind that anymore. And you can go and get evaluated against the criteria. You can even use the existing collaborative protection profiles using the older version of common criteria or the newer version. So you could undertake this now. From an industry perspective, though, I think we want to make sure that those existing protection profiles are adequate, and there may be other things that we want to basically look at. We just haven't really paid much attention to this particular certification. And again, like FIPS 140, it's not cheap. I've done a couple of these, and it could take you a year to do it, and $250,000 plus your internal resources, to pull it off.
Yes. I mean, especially the FIPS side of it, right? It's fairly involved, and you got to go through, as Eric was pointing out, right? You got to go through an accredited lab, get your product certified, and then again, there is so many other considerations. There may be business consideration as to, hey, if your product life cycle, if your NAND or your SoC life cycle is 2 years, you're burning 1.5 years just getting through. Those things are out of the purview of the storage work group, but then those things are real world considerations that we got to think through. But from a CC point of view, CC is the only thing that TCG recognizes, and then what it means, I'll take it as an input for us to go look into.
So one additional thing, and this was said, there was a FIPS 140 session late yesterday, and I think I made this comment. If you are a vendor having a product under evaluation, puts you in a whole different category than somebody who's not.
Yes.
Of course, being validated or certified is good. In the case of 140-3, most likely you are in the pipeline. Under consider. Common criteria can actually be the same kind of scenario. You can actually be under evaluation. And the significance is, depending on, like, for example, I had to do one in Europe. I had to jump through some fiery hoops just to get into the program. We spent almost $100,000 to get into the program. And so that actually carried some weight. Let me say it another way. It enabled multi-million-dollar sales that would not have been possible if we had not been under evaluation. So it's definitely something, just being in the program has its value as opposed to waiting till the very end. So there's some payoff.
I agree with that. Again, market reality is 140-2, you have several products that are qualified and shipping, and depending on what the timelines are, you may continue to ship and make them available. But 140-3, as far as I am aware of, many products are under evaluation. None have really completed the evaluation.
All software.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. 9 products, all software.
All software. Yeah. And that is still in progress. And then the CC, again, as I said, I'll definitely take that, add it to our agenda.
There is a level, the -3 FIPS does tighten things up in multiple ways. And one of the ways things are tightened up is looking at what is really a security-related role. And some of the common policies around TCG have changed. And you better be aware of this.
I understand. So John's question is, the FIPS 140-3, some of the consideration may be tighter. And I think I acknowledge that. And the way I interpret, again, is mostly around the authenticated read, authenticated write type of policy statement, which may be coming in from the zero trust, because I've looked at some of the zero trust documentation on the NIST side. They expect pretty much all data access to be authenticated, and that kind of got inherited, I feel, in some of the guidelines for the FIPS, wherein media access is supposed to be authenticated, which, depending on how you interpret, you can say, yes, media access is authenticated, right? So we in fact, in all of our, or except for the KPIO, right, in many of the TCG Storage Work Group SSCs, you would have authenticated in order to gain access to the media, and then subsequently you perform media access at line rate, right? And is that an acceptable explanation? Probably it's something that we can go explore with NIST, but that's my interpretation. But it could be subject to interpretation depending on where you are and who are discussing this.
I can share that locking and unlocking is clearly authenticated. Mm-hmm. And the current position is that reads and writes, because those themselves are not locking, they rely on previous events. They consider the calling them an authenticated process now implies an implicit authentication, which is no longer allowed. And so security policies that were good under -2 are not good under -3. And I would suspect that has a lot to do with the pileup that Eric has observed.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Anything else? Okay, thank you everybody.